Hello and welcome to State of the Economy, a show which brings you face to face with key policymakers and thinkers. Today we have with us none other than Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who has been in the thick of economic policy making for as long as we remember, starting from 1991 when economic reforms were launched. We are going to have a conversation with him today on the state of the economy today and the way it's going to pan out in 2012 and indeed over the next 4 years over the 12th plan period. Welcome Dr. Montek Ahluwalia. I would start with the larger question of where do you see your 12th plan projections in the backdrop of continued global uncertainty, especially growth slowing down on a more sustained basis in the US and European economies?
Right now, the assessment of the external situation is a lot more negative than it was, let us say, certainly than it was 3 years ago before the financial crisis, but even more negative than about a year ago, because I think the Eurozone crisis has created some uncertainty. I don't think we should be too overwhelmed by short-term uncertainty. I mean, my own expectation is that the present high order of uncertainty about the Eurozone is settling down. One way or the other, the European governments will ensure that there isn't a collapse of the euro. There may be some changes at the margin, but basically the euro will not collapse. And therefore, I think we will essentially have greater financial certainty in the course of the first year of the 12th plan, which begins in April 1, and maybe slower growth for another couple of years in the rest of the world.
So you hope that capital flows will normalize soon?
I would expect that during the 12th plan period, we should assume we are back to normal on capital flows. Let me explain. When I say back to normal, it doesn't mean that capital will keep flowing irrespective of what happens domestically. But you know, the fact is that once stability is restored, so people are not expecting sudden shocks, unknown events, etc. The basic thrust behind capital is where is the world showing growth? And you know,
so capital chases where the returns are.
Yes, and India, without any doubt in anybody's mind, is going to be one of the faster growing countries. Now, if we get our act together, hopefully we'll be above 8%, reaching 9%. But you know, even if it's more pessimistic than that, let's say India grows between 7 and 8%, which I do not think we should be satisfied with, but that's what, let's say, pessimists say. I mean, by comparison, in the industrialized countries, you're going to have growth of 1.5%. So there's no question that there will be a reallocation of capital. And I think we should therefore expect, if India's macroeconomics is sound, we brought inflation under control, we would be one of the attractive places for people to put capital in.
So do you, in the more short term, do you think the rupee, which depreciated recently by about 20%, it will help attract more capital if seen in conjunction with other macroeconomic variables improving like inflation, etc.?
Well, I think capital always flows as a result of a totality. You know, as far as the rupee is concerned, there's a lot of focus on what happened in the last year. But if you go back 3 years or so, at one time, I mean, the rupee had depreciated to something like 48 rupees to the dollar. Yeah. It then appreciated to something like 44.5 rupees to the dollar. Now depreciated back up to 50 plus. So the 50 plus looks like a big change from 44, but it's not such a big change from 48. So I think there's been some somewhat sharper than expected movement in the rupee exchange rate. Ignoring whether it could have been modified or not, the present rupee dollar rate, I would say most people would think, is well aligned to assert that India is in a stable macroeconomic position. A little bit weaker currency always helps domestic producers, helps exporters.
Do you think, is that why, do you think in the first 15 days of this year, January, there's been a fairly big inflow of capital from foreign institutional investors, nearly $1 billion, whereas the whole of the previous year had negative inflows. So do you see that also as a sign that sentiment might be changing in an overall sense?
Well, you know, you could interpret, my view is that sentiment towards India will remain positive. So it's always tempting to regard every positive shift as a proof of that. I personally would not go by what happens in 2-week movements. Because, you know, it could get reversed for 2 weeks and then you don't want to change your basic position. I think my basic position really is the following. As long as people think India is well managed from a macroeconomic point of view, and we're gradually bringing our fiscal deficit under control, and some of the key economic challenges are being held, I think money will flow in.
That's another expectation of the budget. The market is looking at a key number, which is the fiscal deficit for the next financial year. And of course, market is also looking at where the budget will clear up many other supply side bottlenecks which are needed to push domestic growth, especially in the areas of power generation, you know, releasing coal blocks to increase coal supplies.
That's that's not a budget issue.
I know, but budget is often used as a comprehensive
No, but we are not waiting for the budget. I mean, there have been meetings, the Prime Minister has held meetings, there have been newspaper reports that he's charged his own office to do some coordination. You know, getting rid of impediments to infrastructure projects, in my view, is one of the major challenges facing this government. It doesn't require legislation, it doesn't require the budget either. I hope that by the time the budget is presented, the finance minister will be able to indicate that, you know, these were issues we were handling, this is how it's been handled. But the handling of these is not secret. So one will see the outcome of these efforts will be known even before the budget.
So should we look at the recent committee set up by the Prime Minister's office under Mr. Pulak Chatterjee to resolve some of these bottlenecks as a continuing process which may lead to clarity on these issues? Coordination
in government is always a continuing process, but I think what this does reflect is some very well-defined problems have been identified. They were identified through the normal governmental, I mean, we've been briefing the Prime Minister on the importance of doing this. So have the individual ministries. Then you had this very large and influential and important delegation of many of our top businessmen bringing to the Prime Minister that these are problems. And you've seen the newspaper reports on that. Basically, the Prime Minister acknowledged that yes, there are problems. He said he has been briefed by the Planning Commission on them. And he also said that we must try to take care of these problems. He said, well, you know, we may not be able to solve all of them, but we should be able to solve a large number. And then he's basically asked Pulak to sit with the ministries, work out solutions, come back to him, maybe go to cabinet if something requires some special effort. And all of this, the industrialists were told to meet him again after 4 weeks to get an assessment of are things moving or not. So I expect to see movement in this area quite independent of the budget.
We'll just take a small break here. Don't go away. Keep watching Raj Sabha TV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. So we were discussing the present state of the economy. Now, I would like to step back a little and go to an article that you wrote some time ago for the Economic and Political Weekly, where you assessed the 11th plan performance and also you looked at the challenges for the 12th plan going ahead. In your assessment of the 11th plan, you concluded by saying that we've had good growth, roughly about 8.2%. Could have been much higher, but got disrupted by the 2008 global financial crisis. But on the inclusiveness front, you were quite dissatisfied, and you said it has produced mixed results. And you've cited the reasons. Maybe the pace of poverty reduction was unsatisfactory, as also the delivery of a large number of social services were also perhaps less than satisfactory. Annually, we are spending about 1,55,000 crore on a slew of social schemes, social welfare schemes. Now, how do you look at correcting these queue over the next 5 years?
Well, yes, I think it's fair to say that while all around the world, people are regarding our growth performance as really commendable, on inclusiveness, there is criticism. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we're not making progress. There's quite a lot of progress, but I think it's
but less than satisfactory.
That I would say is less than our own targets. That's one. Second, it's now much less than expectation, because expectations are actually running well ahead of targets also, which is a good thing. And it's being magnified, if you like, by media focusing on any weakness here and there and so on. So I would say that on poverty reduction, for example, there is a reduction. The latest,
but not 2% that you had projected in the 11th
but
plan
you
per
see,
year.
the latest data, which is after that article was written, prior to the 11th plan, the rate of reduction in poverty was something like 0.8% per year. The latest data, which go up to 2009, 2010, suggests that the reduction is more than 1 percentage point per year. And furthermore, 2009, 2010 was a drought year. So you would expect that poverty would be a little bit higher. And so the National Sample Survey is bringing out a second estimate for 2011, 2012. And when that becomes available, we'll really know what was the performance over the whole 11th plan period. It's still possible that it may not be as good as 2%, but it'll be much better than in the earlier period. So that's
you've cited some other gentleman's study in your article, which says that the reduction has been 1% per year over the 11th plan period. Some economist from Andhra Pradesh or something.
I can't remember. No, I think I did cite my own colleague Abhijit Sen had done some calculations. There are many economists have done different calculations, but bottom line is that, you know, the reduction is less than was targeted, but I think it's better than it was the case earlier. But at the same time, what is happening is people are quite dissatisfied with the traditional definition of poverty. So, you know, expectations rise, and there's nothing wrong.
For which we now have this new socio-economic and caste survey,
yes, we're going to
which will be used to determine the deprivation.
Right. I mean, it's a different concept. It's a deprivation kind of concept. I think there's one major area, you know, in order to tackle poverty in a systematic way, delivery of health services, delivery of educational services is very crucial. Now, actually in the 11th plan, and even before, we did bring in a lot of schemes that were aimed at doing this. But, you know, setting up the infrastructure for delivery is one thing. Recruiting the personnel to deliver the services is a second thing. And actually ensuring that the quality of the service is good is a third thing.
Coming to health and education, I remember you in that article, you also very specifically mentioned that over the next 5 years, we need to increase our spend on health and education by up to 2% of GDP. But for that, we also have to reduce our fiscal deficit from gross fiscal deficit from somewhere around 7.5–8% today to about 5% by 2014.
In both education and in health, we need to have more public spending, particularly in the case of health. Before the 11th plan, our expenditure on health, center and states put together, plan and non-plan put together, was actually a little less than 1% of GDP. By the end of the 11th plan, we estimate that it's probably 1.4% of GDP. Okay? So it's a little higher than it was earlier. But it should be 2.5% or maybe even 3%.
3%, yeah.
So it's a huge increase that is actually needed if we can get there. So you've got a double problem. On the one hand, for health, for education, maybe even for some of the rural infrastructure, the percentage spent on these investments as a percent of GDP has to rise. On the other hand, for fiscal consolidation, the fiscal deficit has to actually fall.
So how do you reconcile these two?
Well, yeah, you reconcile these two objectives only by, one is doing a better job on the revenue front. And I would really focus a lot there on tax reform. I mean, the idea is not to have a non-reformed revenue system and start raising tax rates, but to do tax structure and tax administration reform.
Something like the GST?
Yes, I think the GST is, in my view, the single most important tax revenue reform measure on the table. Now, we are often criticized for not making progress. It is a political process. It's a center-state process. Many different political parties are involved. I don't want to say that it is blocked for political opportunism, although that obviously is a factor. I think there are genuine concerns. It just takes some time.
But my sense here, if I can intervene here, GST, in my view, has one big problem. It's a political economy problem. Real estate is one of the biggest chunks which GST seeks to include to enhance its revenues. And real estate today and land, again, which you mentioned in your piece, is completely non-transparent, and the politics of the day and politicians of the day are not helping us bring a transparent system of land supply, increasing supply of land, and making land actually pay for the some of these increased social sector spending that we need.
No, I think in my paper I mention 3 or 4 things which represent new kind of challenges. Okay, one of them certainly is the non-transparency associated with land.
As a resource, yeah.
When you have a very rapid growth, and you're also going to have rapid urbanization, the market for land has to be efficient and transparent and fair. And at the moment, there are any number of impediments in that market.
We'll come back to this this point after a small break. Please don't go away. Keep watching Raj Sabha TV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia around the state of the economy. So we were on the issue of, you were talking about transparency, a complete lack of transparency today in the way the land market is developing. Now, one of the problems which we have faced forever now since the time reforms were started in 1991 is the land market, how to use the land market to actually build, to increase supply of land as a key input to the to economic activity, as well as use land as we discussed earlier to generate revenues.
Well, I think the JNNURM was the first time that the government launched a program aimed at addressing the urbanization challenge. I think the results are mixed. I mean, some very good results in terms of expectations, a lot of enthusiasm. Many cities have seen new infrastructure being put up, and that's very good. Disappointment in the sense that this was meant to be linked to a lot of urban reform. And there, I think, while some steps have been taken, they've not been completed, and in many cases, they just haven't taken the second stage of steps. A general problem, particularly for the smaller cities, is the lack of capacity. You know, our cities just do not have a managerial, technical capacity to do urban planning properly. So
is that,
we need to do all these
the problem,
things together.
or lack of some sort of robust politics around urban?
No, I think there's a lot of. I would agree that there's a lack of what you call a robust politics. I mean,
is it a technical problem? Or is it a political problem?
It's actually both. I mean, it's both for 2 reasons. One is on the political side. Effectively letting a city manage itself requires a political delegation, so that the people elected to run the city actually have the power to do a lot of these things. Whereas in most of our cities, that's not the case. I mean, things are being decided at the state government level. So that's what I would call a degree of decentralization. I think there's also a suspicion about any transaction related to land, because these transactions are not seen to be transparent. There's been a long tradition of allocating land, which is a scarce resource, at sub-market prices.
Is this because the political class also refuses to release land from their stranglehold, as it were? Because there's one school of thought which says that land is the only control that the political class has today.
I think, we should not be so negative about politics. The truth of the matter is, if it was the case that political resistance is completely unmovable, then we would never have had any reforms at all. The real problem is that 98% of what needs to be done is at the state level. And
Exactly.
the center can
I'm
talk
talking about
about
state
it, but we
politics.
can't do very much.
That's what I'm talking about, state politics.
Well,
It's
but
only
then
source
I
of
agree,
rent
but then
seeking
you
now.
see we have a lot of states, so one of the things we should be seeing in a well-functioning system is competition among the states. So one would like to say that, look, some states are doing a good job, why are other states not doing the same thing? And I think this is relatively recent. Part of the problem, by the way, is that the expectation of a lot of people is that the JNN-URM will provide all the money. That's not possible. I mean, the amount of money required is not so huge, but if people were to leverage land value,
They have to
they can
generate
get
their
it.
own funds.
But they must generate their own. Now, for that to happen, one thing must be very clear, that the central government will provide resources to incentivize those willing to help themselves, but the central government is not going to fill whatever resource gap there is. And I think JNN-URM too has to focus on that.
So given this backdrop, say over the next plan, how do you modify the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission appropriately so that this process, bottom-up process is put in place?
You know, we are working on that, and my colleague Arun Myra is sort of having lots of discussions on this. I've not seen what comes out of that process, but our objective, in my view, in the 12th plan should be to put in place a structure where center helps to support a reform process which is serious, and in that way those state governments or city governments that are actually willing to make changes get more support. Now there'll be a problem. A lot of people will say, oh, we can't do this, but as a result you're not helping us. So you have to develop a political sympathy and support that if you're laying down a reasonable set of rules, and if some people are willing to help themselves, then they will get the money and the others won't. So how to get support for that in the political space is a challenge. I mean, you know.
Coming back to the overall growth prospect, you know, the 11th plan disappointed on, you would concede, in fact, indeed you have also mentioned in your article, it was a disappointment on agriculture growth, which did not reach the 4% target. Now, where do you see agriculture going in the 12th plan?
When you say disappointed, not reaching the target is not the same thing as disappointed. Agricultural growth in the 11th plan did better than in the 10th plan. So we are actually seeing a turnaround. Secondly, there's a lot going on in agriculture which suggests some structural change, some diversification.
So after lag effect, you'll see
and
some
I expect
results?
that in the 12th plan, you'll see a lot of that. I mean, you know, many states, the revolution going on in the world of seeds, bringing in more hybrids, more private involvement in the seed sector, etc. Quite a lot of things are happening. And the other thing is that, you know, it's happening more in some states, not in others. So in the 12th plan, we hope to document that the story of Indian agriculture in the 11th plan is a story where many states seem to have done very well. And we need to learn from them and their experience. What do I see in the 12th plan? I mean, we think we are setting the target at 4%. My guess is that we've taken it up from 2+% to 3+% in the 11th plan. Now we should get to 4. Some people say we can actually do better than 4. And maybe in due course we will. But 4% target for the 12th plan is really what we need for agriculture.
Okay. And now...
And I should say, by the way, that when I say a 4% target, you know, food grain production will only need to increase by 2%. It is the non-food grain agriculture, horticulture, floriculture, fish, livestock, dairying, that could go up.
Where would you set it? Okay, coming up, moving on from agriculture, where do you set the target for, say, industrial growth? Because in the 11th plan, industrial output growth was also below target. The target was about 11-12%, but we got about 8, probably.
I think we need to go double digit into in industry. Now, you know, we will say 10 to 12%, but I would say 10 plus is a good target for us to aim at.
So now coming back to the overall GDP growth, now there is this new school of thought that India essentially between 2003 and 2008, it rode the global boom. You know, India is among the boats which rose with the tide. And in the next 5 years, if the advanced economies grow at a very subpar rate, then India's potential growth rate would be no more than 7.5%. Do you subscribe to that view?
Well, I'm willing to say that, you know, if the global economy, the industrialized countries slow down, that will have some negative effect on us. Also have some positive effect in the sense they're not competing for oil and other resources. But in my view, we are seeing in the Indian economy an underlying long-term increase in our growth rate. So there have been booms before, but we used to grow at 4%. Now, when we had the last boom, we grew at 9%. When there was a slump, we went down to 7 to 8%. So the real question is that, yes, industrialized countries are not going to grow as rapidly as they did before the last crisis. In our case, by itself, that alone might mean our growth rate is lower. But there's a lot we can do domestically to increase the growth rate because of improved domestic performance. That should be.
Would you say 9%? Would you still be optimistic about 9%?
Well, you know, I don't want to prejudge that, and it looks,
give me a range, 8 to 9?
Oh, I would definitely, in a range, I would say that between 8 and 9, 8, frankly, we should be able to do without much trouble. Because in the 11th plan, we had 2 crisis years, and we did an average of about 8%. And with some improvement, therefore, we should be 8 plus for sure. But the point is, with really strong effort, I don't rule out 9 at all. Only thing is, whereas, you know, if the world was booming, you would say 9 is a pretty good target. When the world's not booming, you could say, well, 9 is feasible, but, you know, it requires more effort.
8 is perfect. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back soon with the next episode. Thank you.